Today, you can take your place in the front row as we get a glimpse into the memorable Springbok career of Keith Andrews. Keith, welcome to Front Row Rugby.
Thank you very much, Peter. It's good to be here with you.
Lovely to have you here as well. Now, let's take a look at today's trivia question. In 2015, the Springboks finished third at the Rugby World Cup. Who did the Boks beat in the third place playoff? Now, if you know the answer to that question, you can put it in the comment section down below. We'll also find out if Keith knows the answer to that question, but we'll do that at the end of our conversation. Keith, I'd like to begin in 1992. South Africa have just been readmitted to international rugby. We're playing the All Blacks and the Wallabies first up. How disappointed were you not to be involved in that?
Obviously, we all got ambitions to play for the Springboks. I just come back from France, where I spent a season. And, obviously, you are disappointed, but thank goodness I managed to make the team for the next tour to France and England.
Speaking of which, you did get to make your debut against the English at Twickenham. How special was that occasion for you?
It was unbelievable. I remember arriving at the ground and going into the change room, and they had probably 20 bars that we all used after the game. Walked onto the pitch, it was pristine. And I also remember before the game, they started singing the national anthems, and I had to stop myself singing God Save the Queen. And then I realized it's probably that I actually came from England. But it was a wonderful occasion. Obviously, the result wasn't what we wanted, but having played my first test at Twickenham was certainly special.
As you said, the result was not one that we would have liked. We were actually leading at halftime. So how disappointing was it that we couldn't see it through?
No, very disappointing. Obviously, we had done all right in France. I think we won one and lost one. But maybe, with us not playing sort of for many years in international competition, we maybe thought we were better than at what we were. But be as it may, it was a learning experience for a lot of us. And a wonderful occasion.
I've had quite a few ex-Springboks on the show that have spoken to me about that 1992 tour, and especially the France leg, where they said it was really, really tough. For example, you guys were given accommodation where maybe the locks couldn't actually fit in the beds. You were ordering a scrum machine, and the scrum machine was in a different town to where your training pitch was, and you had to go up and down the country. One day you're in the north, the next week you're in the south, that sort of thing. What was your experience like of France?
I'd spent the year before in France at a club called Aurillac in the Massif Central, and knowing their culture, knowing what they did before games in terms of preparation, I actually had a wonderful time. I still remember my mate Ian MacDonald, who was my roommate in Paris, crying on the phone to his wife saying, "There's a carte plek D. I hate it. I don't like the food." We were getting served foie gras and champagne. I had the time of my life, and a great, great time. But it was because I think, I'd been there before and I could speak the language to an extent. So at least I could go out in the public and chat to people and enjoy the culture and the rugby vibe.
Hey, if you're enjoying this video, why not hit the like button?
It's always fascinating to hear the different perspectives, isn't it? So, Keith, tell me, what was the differences, would you say, between the French leg of the tour and the English leg?
The French was tough, as you allude to, in terms of the whole team. As you said, we had to go by bus across sort of the country for a day. Accommodation wasn't great. The food wasn't what we were used to in South Africa in terms of meat and potatoes and all that type of stuff. And then suddenly you get to England, where you can speak the language, you can communicate. And the British obviously do things properly. So we were put in wonderful hotels, looked after very well. So there certainly was a big difference between the two countries.
And now another pricky or thorny subject on that tour that we read about at the time and in the sort of subsequent years was provincialism. This idea that the Northern Transvaal guys were hanging out together, the Transvaal guys stuck together, Natal, Western Province, and so on and so forth. What was your experience of that like?
Well, that's true. That's true to an extent, because, for the last few years before the first tour, into France and England, all you knew was provincial rugby, So I was obviously used to the Western Province guys, and maybe Valley Hills was used to the Northern Transvaal guys. So obviously when you come into a team environment, you obviously align yourself with people that you know. So therefore, you'd always sit with the Western Province guys and so forth. But as the team progressed and we got to know each other, I used to dislike a couple of the guys because they played for Northern Transvaal or whatever. But you get to know them and they similar to you, and we've got the same ethos and the same culture. But whilst you were playing before the tour, we hated each other, because that's how we were brought up. And as the tour progressed, we certainly got to get better. And I was fortunate enough to play for another 2 years after that. And certainly when I finished my Springbok career in 1994 in New Zealand, we were sort of a good team, knew each other. There was a lot of integration and so forth. So it was a timing issue because of what had happened before 92.
We'll talk about that 1994 tour to New Zealand as well in a moment. But before that, 1993, Ian McIntosh had just become the new Springbok coach. You were still very much part of that side. I think you were ever present in 93, actually. First up was that series against France, and then we went to Australia and we beat the Wallabies in the opening test match in Sydney. What was that test match like?
It was actually fantastic. I was on the bench and suddenly there was an injury and I had to go on. So it was wonderful to win that test, despite everyone thinking that we were going to get a hiding. It was a wonderful occasion, beautiful stadium, and we played good rugby, so it was very good.
And then we ended up losing the second and the third test matches and losing the series 2-1. Tell me, Keith, why do you think we couldn't see it through?
I think, we thought we were better than we were, I think, from playing in isolation years. We weren't used to new trends, new ways of training and so forth. So I think we were behind the curve. The Aussies technically very astute in terms of working out how the Springboks play and what the strengths and weaknesses are. And they certainly outplayed us in the second and third test.
And then after that, we went to Argentina. And now I had a couple of guys on the show that have spoken in glowing reference, really, to that tour of Argentina. Peter Miller, for example, told me that it was great because of the lacquer meat and the pretty girls. What would you say about that?
No, not a doubt. It is a wonderful place to tour. The rugby was great, but as you say, we used to meet and pretty girls, and the culture very similar to South Africa, so we had a wonderful time there.
And now you mentioned 1994 earlier, and I said we'd talk about that. We went to New Zealand, and again, Peter Miller, same story. He told me that was in fact the toughest tour that he had ever been on. What would you say?
I'd agree with that. It was tough. The whole sort of dynamic is when you arrive there. From the chap standing at the airport taking your passport, he's chirping you. Wherever you go, there's a feeling that they certainly want to beat South Africa. It was a wonderful experience for all of us to tour in that environment, but certainly it was tough. It's cold and it's wet. The rugby's hard. There were no easier games. Like when we played in Australia, you played against maybe Western Force or Western Australia. It was an easier game. You play against Adelaide, it was an easier game. Where in New Zealand, every single match we played was tough encounter.
And speaking of tough encounters, the third test match in that series finished in a draw in Auckland. I think we actually, and as far as I recall, we scored a couple of tries, and I think all their points came from the boot. But I'm not, as I say, I can't recall 100% now. Nevertheless, how close were we to actually winning that test, do you think?
We were very close. If you look at the series itself, I think we lost it on a couple of points, I think 3 or 4 points. So we were very evenly contesting. We were quite close as two different sides. I think in the bigger scheme of things, we might have been a bit unlucky, but, the ball falls that way or bounces a certain way. But overall, at the end of the day, they won it, I think 2-1 or 2-0, having the draw in the third test. But it was a very close game. We obviously felt off the game that we could have had it if we had taken our chances, but be as it may, it wasn't what meant to be.
That's how it goes sometimes, isn't it? So, Keith, how disappointed were you then that that was where your test career came to an end?
Obviously, yourself, certain coaches rate certain players, and I got on very well with Ian McIntosh. Obviously, he was his first choice in the last test. Excuse me. Then you'll remember that Ian McIntosh got fired on the way back on the plane, where Kitch Christie was brought in. And Kitch Christie, obviously, having been the coach of Transvaal, obviously knew certain players there which he preferred. And he said to me up front, and quite rightly so, he said, Keith, if you want to play for my side, you're going to put on 10 Ks. And I was really 112, and I was 32, and I wasn't prepared to, try and bulk up illegally or legally. So be as it may, they selected, I think it's Barley Swat and I forget who it was in the tight head position, and that's how it goes. Obviously disappointed because it was a wonderful event, an occasion, the 1995 World Cup. Marius Hurter, so it was Marius Hurter, yeah. But yeah, Kitch Christie did very well. He won the World Cup, and he obviously made the right decision.
Tough one indeed, that. So Keith, tell me then, how disappointed were you that you didn't get the chance to play professional rugby?
Obviously, if you look at rugby today, I'd have loved to have played in the UK, but I was fortunate enough, as I alluded to earlier on, to play 2 seasons in France. We were paid then. We paid a stipend and paid for your accommodation and so forth. So it was semi-professional, all under the carpet in those days. But with the modern game, the guys earn well. Obviously, there are some problems in the professional clubs, especially in Wales at the moment, I see, in terms of paying their players and so forth, and whether it's sustainable or not. But certainly maybe just born too early. I'd have loved to have spent 10 years playing in the UK and France or Scotland or wherever. So
who was your toughest opponent?
My toughest opponent was Guy Kebbel, but thank goodness he was only fit for 1 year. I don't know if you remember, Guy was with me in Western Province, and he went to the Sharks, went to Natal, where they won the Currie Cup in 1992, I think, where he had Tom Lawton and I think, I forget, Gerard Harding, I think, on the tight head, and they had a monster pack. And Guy was fit. And I remember I had Andrew Patterson next to me, and I think it was Gary Pagel, and they were mowing us in the scrums, and Guy Kebbel kept on apologizing to me, saying, Keith, I'm ever sorry, but I'm pushing you back at about 1,000 knots an hour. But he was certainly very, very, very strong. But as I said, he was only fit for 1 year. The following year, he wasn't as fit as he should have been. So I knew that I'd have to hold on for 2 scrums, and then it was fine. But he was certainly a powerful, powerful scrummager. When I was playing for Western Province, the chap who gave me one of the biggest hidings I've ever had, apart from Guy Kebbel, was Heinrich Rogers. When we went up to Loftus Versfeld, it's the first time I saw my lungs from upside my backside.
I think some of those front row stories are always the most entertaining. Keith, something that I ask all of the former Springboks that appear on this show is to share a funny or a memorable moment from your time with the Boks.
Memorable moment? I made my last game for the Springboks was Mark Andrews' first game for the Springboks when we played in Auckland in 1994, where we drew 16-all. And I was one of the older guys, and Mark was standing next to me. He was a hell of a psyched up, and we were facing the haka. And as they were doing their thing, I said to Mark, Jesus, how ugly are those bastards? And we both started laughing and giggling. We couldn't help ourselves, and we got some very, very weird and angry looks from the New Zealand because they thought we were laughing at them. But meanwhile, I was just playing a joke or mentioning a joke to Mark Andrews.
Tell me, as somebody who actually faced the haka, what is it actually like in that moment?
That's wonderful. You as a schoolboy, you always want to play for the Springboks, and your ultimate opponent would be the New Zealanders, and you obviously would want to face the haka. So it was a wonderful occasion. I think in those days they only did the haka in New Zealand. Well, no, maybe only for test matches, where as they seem to do it a little bit more regularly now. But it was a wonderful occasion being able to face the haka and reach a dream of mine.
And speaking of Mark, I actually had your cousin on the program in the most recent episode. And I don't know if you might remember this. He told me that you were sitting in the stands during that Pretoria test match in '94 when we got murdered by England quite brutally in the first test. And he told me that you sort of leant to the side and said to him, it's just as well we're not playing in this test match this week. Do you remember that?
Certainly, there's some good games to miss. There were some good games to miss. I think Mark got selected the following game when they played in Cape Town, I think. And from there, he shot the stars out. He did very, very well for the Springboks.
He certainly did. Keith, we're going to take a look at the trivia question again quickly. So in 2015, the Springboks finished third at the Rugby World Cup. Who did the Boks beat in the third place playoff? Keith, do you know the answer?
That was New Zealand won it in 2015. Third place playoff, was it not against France?
Oh, no. So France were beaten in the quarterfinals, and it was all four Southern Hemisphere teams that were in the semis, and we ended up playing Argentina and beating them in that third place playoff.
Quite right, Peter.
Keith, one other thing I need to ask you is, what are you up to these days?
I'm a director and shareholder of a trust company in Cape Town called Personal Trust. We look after retired folks' financial affairs. I've been here for 27 years. I've been very fortunate that a lot of my colleagues are ex-rugby people, and I think that's why I got the job. Now, if you're a UCT boy and you're looking for a job, you can always get a job at Personal Trust. It's basically part of our ethos. So I've been very fortunate to land up here and in a job that I like.
Keith Andrews, let me say that it was a pleasure having you on Front Row Rugby today. Fascinating conversation, and I hope that we can have you on again in the future.
Good, Peter, very nice to meet you, and thanks very much for the interview. I certainly enjoyed it.
Last time on Front Row Rugby, I had Keith's cousin, Mark Andrews, the 1995 Rugby World Cup winner on this show. You can go and have a look at the video. It's appearing on your screen right now. Next time, I'll have 2007 Rugby World Cup champion, Andre Pretorius. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed that video, why not tackle the like button? You can also subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any content from Front Row Rugby. See you next time.